Imagine, if you will, a kingdom, not of stone castles and high turrets, but of whispering forests and winding private roads. It lies nestled deep in the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas, a landscape of ancient rolling hills and dense canopies of oak and hickory. There is no grand gatehouse announcing its presence, no gilded crest proclaiming a family name. There is only an unassuming turnoff from a country road, a gate that is always closed, and a silence so profound it feels engineered. This is not a single house. It is a sprawling archipelago of estates, a collection of bespoke fortresses disguised as comfortable family homes, connected by pathways unseen by any public eye. One structure might be a symphony of glass and native stone, built to embrace the view, another a more traditional manner, solid and reassuring. They are separated by acres of curated wilderness, buffer zones of privacy measured not in feet, but in miles of woodland. This is the heart of an empire, yet it projects no power. It is a multi-billion-dollar statement of disappearance. This place is an architectural paradox. It is an empire built on the principle of being seen, of maximum visibility, a brand whose blue and white logo is more recognizable than the flags of most nations. Yet its creators, the heirs to that empire, have used their immeasurable resources to achieve the opposite, to become invisible. They constructed a global stage for commerce and then built a personal sanctuary so remote, so fortified, it is practically a myth. The very existence of this compound is a contradiction. It should not exist. It is the architectural expression of a family that presides over the most public company in the world while living one of the most private lives imaginable. Who are the people who solve the riddle of modern commerce, who bent global supply chains to their will, only to turn that same obsessive focus toward the art of vanishing? What secrets are held, not in dusty attics, but in the very design of this silent kingdom? What is it they are so afraid of? Is it the world they helped to create, or is it the crushing weight of the name they carry? To understand this fortress of quiet, we must first understand the man who never felt the need to build it, and the storm of fortune he unleashed upon his children. We must go back to a time before the silence, to a time of relentless, unapologetic noise. We must go back to the Genesis. The story does not begin in a boardroom or with a grand vision for a global dynasty. It begins, as so many American stories do, in the dust and scarcity of the Great Depression. It begins with a young man named Samuel Moore Walton, born in Kingfisher, Oklahoma, in 1918. He was a child of an era that taught lessons in the harshest possible language, the language of lack. For Sam, waste was not a business inefficiency, it was a moral failing. A penny saved was not just a penny earned. It was a small victory against the chaos of a world that could take everything away in an instant. He grew up with the conviction that nothing was guaranteed. He delivered newspapers, milked the family cow, and sold the surplus, and waited tables. Every chore was a transaction, every dollar a testament to his own hustle. This was not the grooming of a future titan of industry. It was the simple, desperate calculus of a boy determined to climb out of the precariousness of his time. His father was a farm appraiser and mortgage agent, a man who saw firsthand how quickly fortunes could turn to dust, how land and legacy could be washed away by economic tides. The lesson was seared into the young Walton. Security was not inherited. It was built, day by day, with calloused hands and a restless mind. His ambition was not for opulence. He never dreamed of palaces or yachts. His dream was simpler and, in its way, far more absolute. He dreamed of winning. He was a quarterback in high school, an Eagle Scout, voted most versatile boy. He saw life as a series of manageable contests, and he had an innate confidence that he could outwork, outthink, and out-hustle anyone. When he studied economics at the University of Missouri, he was not absorbing abstract theories. He was gathering tools. He was learning the mechanics of the game he intended to dominate. The defining motivation was forged in these early years. It was not a desire to escape a tainted family name or overcome social exclusion. It was the opposite. It was a fierce, almost defiant pride in his small-town roots. He saw the condescension of big-city retailers, the way they overlooked the needs and the wallets of rural America. His core psychological driver was to prove them all wrong. He would build an empire not in New York or Chicago, but from the heartland outwards. He would show the world that the most sophisticated, efficient, and powerful retail machine on earth could be run by a man in a pickup truck who preferred a cheap haircut and a cup of coffee at the local diner. His perceived deficit was his geography, and he would turn that geography into his greatest weapon. After serving in the military during World War II, he began his ascent. He bought a Ben Franklin variety store in Newport, Arkansas, a franchise of a larger chain. It was here, in this small testing ground, that the Walton philosophy began to take shape. He would pile merchandise high, slash prices, and extend store hours, especially during holidays. He was a constant student of his customers, relentlessly seeking what they wanted and figuring out the cheapest possible way to give it to them. He was a restless innovator, a tinkerer not with machines, but with the very concept of retail. But a visionary, even one as driven as Sam Walton, rarely builds alone. His story is inseparable from his union with Helen Robson, the daughter of a prosperous banker and rancher. Their marriage in 1943 was more than a partnership. It was a merger of ambitions, a crucial balancing act. Helen was educated, cultured, and possessed a quiet strength that anchored Sam's frenetic energy. While Sam was the engine of commerce, Helen was the guardian of the family's soul. It was her conviction, her refusal to live in a large city, that cemented Bentonville, Arkansas, as the family's home and the future headquarters of their global empire. She wanted her children to grow up in a small town, to have the kind of grounded childhood that a metropolis, in her view, could not provide. This decision, seemingly a personal preference, would become one of the most critical strategic pillars of the Walmart story. It kept the company's leadership insulated from the groupthink of corporate America. It reinforced the brand's identity as a small-town champion, and it set the stage for the profound paradox to come. A family that would become the richest in the world, yet remain geographically and culturally rooted in a town of a few thousand people. Helen provided the stability, Sam provided the storm. Together, they laid the foundation not just for a company, but for a dynasty that would have to reckon with the consequences of that storm for generations to come. The conception of the house, the true house, the empire of Walmart, was not born from a blueprint. It was an evolution, a relentless series of experiments. When Sam Walton lost the lease on his successful first store in Newport, it was a pivotal moment. He was not defeated, he was energized. The setback taught him a valuable lesson about owning his own destiny. He and Helen moved to Bentonville, a town of just 3,000 people, and opened a new store, Walton's 5 and 10, on the town square. This modest shop was the first brick in the fortress. The decision to build was not about creating a home, but about forging a weapon. The first true Walmart store, opened in Rogers, Arkansas in 1962, was a strategic tool designed for a single purpose: to deliver the lowest possible price to the consumer. This was not architecture as art. It was architecture as pure, unadulterated strategy. The building itself was a message. It was a simple utilitarian box, often built on the edge of town where land was cheap. There were no marble floors, no ornate fixtures, no grand entrances. The aesthetic was one of aggressive frugality. The lighting was flat and unforgivingly bright. The aisles were wide and long, and the shelves were stacked high with merchandise. The store was a machine for selling. This architectural psychology is a direct reflection of Sam Walton's own psyche. Every choice was a calculation of value. Why spend money on expensive flooring when concrete was cheaper and just as effective? Why invest in fancy decor when that money could be used to lower the price of a can of beans by another cent? The very plainness of the stores was a form of communication. It told the customer, "We are not wasting your money on frivolous things. We are giving you the product, unadorned and at the best possible price." The house that Sam built was an architecture of anti-luxury, a cathedral of pure pragmatism. The real genius, however, was in the invisible architecture, the systems that held the empire together. While the stores were simple, the logistics supporting them were revolutionary. Walton was obsessed with efficiency. He invested heavily in a private trucking fleet to control distribution, building massive, strategically located warehouses that could service his stores faster and cheaper than any competitor. He was a pioneer in information technology. In an era when retail was still largely an analog business, Walmart was building a private satellite communications system to link every single store directly to the corporate headquarters in Bentonville. This system allowed for real-time sales tracking. A manager in Arkansas could know exactly how many tubes of toothpaste had sold in a store in Texas just minutes ago. This was the architecture of total control. It was a nervous system for the corporate body, allowing the brain in Bentonville to react instantly to the twitch of a finger 1,000 miles away. The scale of this construction was immense, a testament to an almost manic obsession. While competitors were building a few stores a year, Walmart was engaged in a blitzkrieg of expansion. The cost was enormous, the logistics staggering. Walton financed this explosive growth by taking the company public in 1970, a move that would eventually turn his family into the wealthiest on earth. But he never relinquished control. The family would always hold the majority of the shares, ensuring the company would forever bear his imprint. The key contrast, the element that defined the entire enterprise, was the jarring juxtaposition of global sophistication and local simplicity. Here was a company using satellite technology that rivaled government agencies, yet its corporate culture was built around folksy slogans and company cheers. Its CEO, soon to be the richest man in America, was famous for driving a beat-up Ford pickup truck, his bird dogs in the back. The Saturday morning meeting at the Bentonville headquarters became the stuff of legend. It was part business review, part revival meeting, where executives and store managers alike were expected to share numbers, confess failures, and reaffirm their faith in the Walton way. This contrast was not an accident. It was the brand. It was the story of the common man, armed with uncommon genius, taking on the world and winning. The house Sam Walton built was a paradox, a humble-looking structure on the outside, powered by the most complex and powerful commercial engine ever conceived. The Golden Age arrived not with a single event, but as a relentless rising tide. Through the 1980s and into the early 1990s, the machine Sam Walton built reached its peak of influence. Walmart was no longer just a successful chain of discount stores. It was an unstoppable cultural and economic force. It became the largest retailer in the United States in 1990, a position it would never relinquish. The name, once a regional curiosity, was now a household word, a synonym for low prices and vast selection. The empire was complete, and its power was absolute. The sensory experience of this golden age was not one of champagne and chandeliers. It was the hum of a perfectly calibrated system operating on a continental scale. It was the glow of fluorescent lights reflecting off polished linoleum floors in 1,000 identical stores, a constellation of commerce burning brightly across the American landscape. It was the rumble of the nation's largest private truck fleet, a ceaseless caravan of blue and white vehicles thundering down interstate highways at all hours of the day and night. It was the constant reassuring beep of barcode scanners at tens of thousands of checkout counters, a sound that became the rhythm of American consumption, the very heartbeat of the empire. The lavish parties were not held in ballrooms, but in the aisles of newly opened stores. The most influential guests were not socialites, but the customers themselves, who flocked to grand openings with an almost religious fervor. The flawless operation of the estate was not managed by butlers, but by store managers and hourly associates, all indoctrinated in the Walton way. The center of this universe remained the Saturday morning meeting in Bentonville. It was the court of the king, a place where data was scripture and sales figures were hymns. To be invited was to have an audience with the heart of power. Manufacturers and suppliers from across the globe would make the pilgrimage to this small Arkansas town, not to negotiate, but to receive their instructions. Walmart did not follow trends. It created them. It could make or break a product with a single purchasing decision. This was the establishment of power in its purest form. The house that Sam built had successfully rewritten the rules of American business. It had elevated its owner from a small-town merchant to the richest man in the country. It attracted the attention and often the deference of the very corporate giants he had set out to challenge. The company's gravitational pull was so immense that it began to reshape the landscape around it. Small towns courted Walmart, seeing a new store as a sign of economic salvation. Main streets, once the heart of local commerce, began to wither as the big box on the edge of town drew all the lifeblood away. The house had become more than a home for a business. It had become the architect of a new American geography. Yet, even at this zenith of success, a subtle melancholy began to permeate the structure. There were whispers, even then, that this grand edifice was a kind of golden cage. For the family, the sheer scale of the wealth was becoming an isolating force. The name Walton was no longer just a name. It was a symbol, a public entity. For the country, the house was proving to be too large for the ecosystem it inhabited. The relentless efficiency that was its genius was also its curse, creating a world of lower prices but also of lower wages, of consolidated power and diminished local autonomy. The foreshadowing of emptiness was palpable. The triumph of the one great house was casting a long, cold shadow over the thousands of smaller houses it had been built to serve. The stage was set for a tragedy, not of financial collapse, but of success itself. The perfect world, so meticulously constructed, began to show its first inevitable cracks. The conflict did not arrive like a thunderclap, but as a slow, corrosive change in the weather. The powerful external force that disrupted the Walton dynasty was not a business rival or an economic downturn. It was an intangible, abstract antagonist, public scrutiny. The narrative, for decades a celebration of an American success story, began to curdle. The scrappy underdog from Arkansas was now seen as a Goliath, a predatory empire. The whispers that had begun in the Golden Age grew into a roar of criticism. The company was besieged by lawsuits alleging gender discrimination and unfair labor practices. Unions, which Sam Walton had fought off with religious zeal, painted Walmart as the arch nemesis of the American worker. Communities that had once welcomed the big blue box now protested its arrival, armed with studies about its destructive effect on local economies. The very things that had been praised as genius, the ruthless efficiency, the pressure on suppliers, the low wages, were now condemned as sins. The House of Triumph was being recast as a house of exploitation. The company that had built its brand on being the friend of the common man was now accused of being his greatest enemy. Then, in the midst of this gathering storm, the personal tragedy struck. On April 5, 1992, Sam Walton died. The patriarch, the visionary, the engine and soul of the entire enterprise was gone. His death was the pivotal, devastating event that shattered the family's world. For 50 years, he had been the sun around which everything orbited. He absorbed the criticism. He drove the vision. He was the public face, the folksy, pickup-driving billionaire who could disarm critics with a simple grin and a howdy. He was the lightning rod for the entire empire. With his passing, that rod was gone. His children, Rob, John, Jim, and Alice, were left not only to grieve their father, but to inherit his crown. They were now the stewards of the world's largest corporation and one of history's greatest fortunes, and they were standing exposed in the full glare of a hostile public spotlight. They had not built this empire, but they were now responsible for defending it. The skills required to run the machine were different from the skills required to justify its existence. This moment marked a profound thematic shift. The house transformed. It was no longer a house of triumph, a monument to a father's relentless ambition. It became a house of loneliness, a fortress under siege. The family's primary objective was no longer expansion and innovation. It was preservation and defense. They had to defend the company's reputation, defend their accumulated wealth from legal and political challenges, and, most urgently, defend their own personal lives from the relentless intrusion that came with their name. The joyous noise of the Saturday morning meeting was replaced by the somber hum of legal departments and public relations war rooms. The fall was not a financial one. The machine was too powerful, its momentum too great. The company's profits continued to soar. The fall was a fall from grace. It was the moment the family realized that the fortune their father had built to give them security had, in fact, become the source of their greatest insecurity. Their control, which had seemed so absolute, began to unravel. They were no longer the masters of a great company. They were the prisoners of a great fortune. Their father had built a global village, and now they were its most famous and most vilified inhabitants. Their response would be to retreat, to build walls, to begin the great, slow process of disappearing from the world their father had conquered. After the patriarch's death, the central question became, what happens to the house when the builder is gone? For the Walton Empire, the structure itself did not fall into disrepair. Instead, it metastasized. It grew even larger, more powerful, and more integrated into the fabric of global life. But the family's relationship to it underwent a fundamental transformation. They were no longer the hands-on operators. Sam's eldest son, Rob, took over as chairman of the board, a steady hand guiding the corporate ship. But the other children began to drift away from the day-to-day operations of the retail machine, their lives now defined by the stewardship of immense wealth rather than the management of stores. They became custodians of a legacy that was both a blessing and a profound burden. This led to the Great Emptying. It was not an auction of priceless heirlooms or the shuttering of a grand estate. It was a strategic, deliberate withdrawal from the public square. The family, once accessible figures in their small Arkansas town, receded behind a veil of impenetrable privacy. They stopped giving interviews. They made few public appearances outside of carefully controlled corporate or philanthropic events. They began to construct the physical and legal architecture of invisibility. This is when the mythical compound in the Ozarks began to take shape, not just as a collection of homes, but as a concept. It was the physical manifestation of their retreat. The emptying was an emptying of self from the public narrative, a creation of a vacuum that was immediately filled with speculation, criticism, and myth. They became ghosts in their own machine. Then came the most fascinating and ironic repurposing of the family's legacy. The vast controversial fortune earned from the mass market sale of everyday goods was channeled into an entirely new kind of construction. Alice Walton, the founder's only daughter, had a different vision. She was not a retailer, she was a collector. Her passion was for art, and she embarked on a project as ambitious in its own way as her father's first Walmart, the creation of a world-class museum of American art, placed defiantly in the heart of Bentonville, Arkansas. Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art opened in 2011, a breathtaking architectural marvel of glass and wood pavilions nestled in a wooded ravine. The irony was staggering. The profits derived from an empire of low culture, of plastic toys, cheap apparel, and canned goods sold under fluorescent lights were being used to acquire and house the treasures of high culture. Works by Norman Rockwell, Andy Warhol, and Georgia O'Keeffe were purchased and brought to the very town that served as the headquarters for the apostle of low prices. The museum was a brilliant, complex act. It was an act of genuine philanthropy, a gift to the community and the nation. But it was also an act of legacy laundering, an attempt to rebrand the Walton name from a symbol of ruthless commerce to one of civic virtue and cultural patronage. It was a public temple built to shore up a private identity, a beautiful and complicated answer to the question of what to do with a fortune too large to spend. Through all this, the criticism, the transformation, the retreat, the house itself survived against all odds. While other corporate dynasties of the 20th century faded or were broken up, the Walton Empire endured. It weathered recessions, lawsuits, and a complete revolution in public perception. Its survival was a testament to the raw power of its founder's original design, a system so efficient, so deeply embedded in the lives of hundreds of millions of people that it became as essential and immovable as a utility. The family may have retreated from the throne room, but the castle they inherited continued to dominate the landscape, a silent, unassailable monument to a complicated and contradictory American dream. Today, the kingdom stands, larger and more powerful than ever. The Walton family remains the wealthiest in the world, their fortune growing with every passing second, with every beep of a scanner in over 10,000 stores across the globe. The company they control is a sovereign economic nation, its decisions affecting global trade, manufacturing, and the livelihoods of millions. The philanthropic machine they have built, fueled by that fortune, is a colossal force in its own right, funding initiatives in education, environmental conservation, and, of course, the arts. The paradox that began with Sam Walton's death is now fully realized, a permanent state of being. The family presides over an empire of maximum exposure while living lives of maximum privacy. The fortress of silence in the Ozarks is no longer a retreat. It is their natural habitat. It is tempting to draw a direct parallel to that great American novel of wealth and disillusionment, The Great Gatsby. But the comparison is flawed. Jay Gatsby threw his lavish parties to be seen, to lure Daisy from across the bay, to project an image of success. His entire enterprise was one of ostentatious display. The Waltons have done the precise opposite. They have used their fortune not to throw a party for the world, but to build a wall against it. Their story is not a tragedy of unrequited love, but something more modern, more complex. It is closer, perhaps, to a Gothic novel, the story of a great house haunted by the ghost of its builder. Or, more accurately, it is the 21st century version of Charles Dickens's Bleak House, where the central antagonist is not a person, but a vast, intractable system, the endless lawsuit of Jarndyce and Jarndyce that consumes the lives of everyone it touches. The Walton fortune is the modern Jarndyce case, a colossal inheritance that defines and perhaps confines every heir. This story, born in the dust of Oklahoma, connects directly to the anxieties of our hyper-modern world. In an age of social media, we are all amateur architects of our own identity. We build facades, curate our images, and project a carefully constructed version of our lives for public consumption. The Waltons' dilemma is our own, magnified to an almost incomprehensible scale. We worry about our digital footprint. They must manage a footprint that has physically reshaped continents. We strive for a following. They strive for anonymity. Their epic struggle to reclaim a private self from an overwhelmingly public identity is the essential drama of our time. They are simply the only family with the resources to wage that war with forests, foundations, and legal firewalls. What then is the final philosophical statement? What is the ultimate lesson of the house that Sam built? It is a cautionary tale about the nature of creation. Sam Walton, a man of simple tastes and ferocious ambition, built a machine. He designed it with a single purpose: to serve the customer, to deliver value, to win the game. And he succeeded more completely than perhaps anyone in the history of commerce. But the machine grew beyond his intentions, beyond his control, beyond anyone's control. It developed its own logic, its own momentum, its own morality. It became an ecosystem unto itself, indifferent to the towns it starved, the workers it squeezed, and the family it enriched. The ultimate legacy of the Walton dynasty is the profound and chilling realization that you cannot build an empire of such magnitude without creating consequences that will ripple through generations. The fortune that was meant to provide everything, security, freedom, choice, ended up costing them something fundamental and irreplaceable. It cost them the simple, profound, and now unattainable luxury of being ordinary. And so, we are left with a final, lingering image. We are back in the Ozarks, looking at that silent, sprawling kingdom of trees and shadows. The light fades over the rolling hills. Inside those homes, behind the gates and the walls of green, a family lives with the ghost of a man in a pickup truck and the ceaseless hum of his creation. The houses are beautiful, the views are breathtaking, the security is absolute, but the silence is deafening. It is the sound of a name so heavy it can no longer be spoken in public. It is the sound of a golden cage, impeccably designed, perfectly comfortable, and utterly inescapable. A house that time and fortune decided to build, and a family that must now and forever live inside.